He conquered half the world. Generals feared him. Kings begged him for peace. But in one single moment, one catastrophic decision, Napoleon Bonaparte handed the world his own defeat. At his peak, Napoleon controlled more land than any European ruler since the Roman Empire. His empire stretched from the Atlantic coast to the borders of Russia. His military genius was unmatched. In battle after battle, he outmaneuvered, outthought, and outfought every enemy thrown at him. But power has a price, and arrogance has a consequence. This is the story of how the greatest military mind in history destroyed himself, with one decision. It began in chaos. France in 1789 was burning. The revolution had toppled the monarchy, but left the country leaderless and vulnerable. Into this chaos stepped a young Corsican artillery officer, ambitious, brilliant, and absolutely ruthless. His first Italian campaign shocked all of Europe. Outnumbered and undersupplied, Napoleon defeated Austria in a series of lightning-fast battles. In just 1 year, he took control of the entire Italian peninsula, something France's generals had failed to do for decades. He returned to Paris a hero, and he had bigger plans: Egypt. Napoleon dreamed of cutting off Britain's trade routes to India. It was bold, it was visionary, and it nearly worked. His army sailed south. The ancient land of the pharaohs was about to meet the French Empire. At the Battle of the Pyramids, Napoleon's tactical squares destroyed Egypt's Mamluk cavalry. It was a masterpiece of military engineering, but Britain's Admiral Nelson found the French fleet anchored at Aboukir Bay and destroyed it completely. Napoleon was now stranded in Egypt. Stranded, cut off, and with a crumbling army, a lesser man would have surrendered. Napoleon abandoned his army and sailed secretly back to France. Back in France, he orchestrated a coup, the 18th Brumaire. In one night, he dismantled the government and named himself first consul. 5 years later, he crowned himself Emperor of France, taking the crown from the Pope's own hands and placing it on his own head. A message to the world: no one gives Napoleon power. He takes it. Austerlitz, Jena, Friedland. One by one, Europe's great powers fell before him. His Imperial Guard, the finest soldiers on earth, became feared across every battlefield in Europe. By 1807, Napoleon was untouchable, the master of a continent. And that is exactly when things started to go wrong. There was one enemy Napoleon could never defeat: Britain. Safe behind her navy, she kept funding Napoleon's enemies and keeping resistance alive. So Napoleon created the Continental System, a total economic blockade. No European nation could trade with Britain. He would strangle her economy. On paper, it was genius. In practice, it was slowly strangling Napoleon's own allies and turning friends into enemies. Portugal refused to comply. Napoleon saw opportunity and made his first catastrophic move. He invaded Spain. It seemed simple. The Spanish army was weak. The king was incompetent. It should have taken weeks. Napoleon replaced the Spanish king with his own brother, Joseph. And that single act ignited a fire that would never go out. The Spanish people rose up, not in organized armies, but in guerrilla warfare. A new kind of fighting that Napoleon's rigid military doctrine was completely unprepared for. Spain became a bleeding wound. 300,000 French soldiers pinned down, thousands dying every month. Not in grand battles, but in ambushes, assassinations, and endless guerrilla attacks. And Britain sent Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, to make it worse. He supplied the Spanish, trained their armies, and began methodically pushing France back. Napoleon called Spain his Spanish ulcer. It never healed. It just kept bleeding. Men, gold, and most dangerously, morale. Meanwhile, Napoleon's relationship with the Pope, already fragile, collapsed entirely. When the Pope refused to support the blockade, Napoleon made another fatal mistake. He had the Pope arrested. In one act, he turned millions of devout Catholics across Europe, his own subjects, against him. Austria watched Spain carefully. They had been humiliated before. But Napoleon's army was stretched thin. They began secretly preparing for revenge. In 1809, Austria struck. Napoleon rushed north, defeated them again at Wagram, but it cost him. The victory was brutal, bloody, and expensive. He was still winning battles, but the empire was getting harder and harder to hold together. For personal and political reasons, he divorced Josephine, the woman who had been his greatest supporter, and married an Austrian princess instead. His inner circle was shaken, and then Napoleon looked east, to Russia. Tsar Alexander had been forced into an alliance with Napoleon after his humiliating defeat at Friedland. But Russia was secretly violating the continental blockade, trading with Britain. Napoleon could not allow it. His entire economic strategy depended on total compliance. He made his decision: Russia must be crushed. In June 1812, Napoleon assembled the Grande Armée, 600,000 soldiers, the largest military force the world had ever seen, and he pointed it at Moscow. The invasion of Russia, the greatest gamble in military history, and the decision that would destroy everything Napoleon had built. The Russians refused to fight. They retreated deep into their own territory, burning everything behind them. No food, no shelter, no glory, just endless empty land. Napoleon's supply lines, stretched over 1,000 kilometers, began to collapse. Horses died by the thousands. Disease spread through the camps. At Borodino, the Russians finally stood and fought. 70,000 men died in a single day. Napoleon won the field, but the Russian army survived. Napoleon entered Moscow expecting victory. Instead, he found silence. The Russians had evacuated the entire city, and then the city burned. The Russians set fire to their own capital, depriving Napoleon of the supplies, shelter, and symbolic victory he desperately needed. He waited 5 weeks for Alexander to negotiate. The Tsar never responded. Napoleon had taken the capital, but Russia simply didn't care. In October, with supplies gone and winter approaching, Napoleon ordered the retreat. It was the beginning of a catastrophe beyond imagination. The Russian winter attacked what Russian armies could not. Men froze to death in their sleep. Horses collapsed. The greatest army in history fell apart one frozen soldier at a time. At the Berezina River, with Russian forces closing in from all sides, it became a desperate fight for survival. Thousands drowned. Thousands more were captured. The emperor who had conquered Europe rode in silence through the ghost of his grand army. Of 600,000 men who entered Russia, fewer than 100,000 came back. News of the disaster spread instantly. Every nation Napoleon had conquered began to rise. The empire was surrounded. Back in Paris, Napoleon raised a new army from boys barely old enough to shave. France had given everything, and Napoleon asked for more. At Leipzig in 1813, the Battle of Nations, the combined armies of Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden surrounded Napoleon. He fought brilliantly, but 3 armies against 1 was simply too much. The bridge was blown too early. Thousands of French soldiers were cut off and captured. It was over. In March 1814, Allied armies entered Paris for the first time in generations. Napoleon had been defeated. He abdicated. The emperor was exiled to the island of Elba, a tiny rock off the Italian coast. His empire divided among the victors. But Napoleon was never the kind of man who accepted defeat. He spent 11 months on Elba. Then, in one audacious move, he escaped. He landed with 700 men. By the time he reached Paris, he had an army. France welcomed him back because France remembered what it felt like to be great. The 100 Days. Europe panicked. The Allies mobilized every army they had. Napoleon had one last chance. At Waterloo on June 18, 1815, Napoleon came agonizingly close. But Wellington held, and then the Prussians arrived. The Imperial Guard broke. When that happened, when those soldiers ran, every French soldier knew it was truly over. Napoleon stood alone on the field, the greatest military genius the world had ever seen, beaten, not by better strategy, but by the combined weight of all the enemies his arrogance had made. He surrendered to the British. They exiled him to St. Helena, one of the most remote islands on Earth. He would never leave. On St. Helena, Napoleon did what no battlefield enemy had managed. He conquered history. He dictated his memoirs, crafting his own legend, controlling how the world would remember him. He died on May 5, 1821. He was 51 years old, not killed in battle, not executed, slowly destroyed by the island, and possibly, historians believe, by slow arsenic poisoning. So what went wrong? Everything and nothing. Napoleon didn't lose because he stopped being brilliant. He lost because he believed brilliance alone was enough. The Spain decision opened a wound that never closed. The Russia decision bled his empire dry. And his inability to ever truly make peace when he was winning meant the war never ended until he was gone. And yet, his legal code still governs France and dozens of other nations today. His administrative reforms built the modern state. His universities still stand. In some ways, Napoleon never really lost. Napoleon once said, "The truest wisdom is a resolute determination." He had that, more than any man alive. What if he had stopped in 1807? His empire was secure. His enemies were beaten. He could have made peace from a position of total strength. The France he built might have lasted centuries. Instead, he chose to keep going. Spain, Russia, the Pope, one enemy at a time, until he had created them all at once. The greatest conqueror in modern history was ultimately conquered by himself, by his own refusal to accept that limits exist, even for genius. There has never been another Napoleon. History has tried to produce one. It hasn't managed it yet. Whether that's a tragedy or a mercy depends entirely on who you ask. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who almost ruled the world, and who in the end could not rule himself. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. You love history that actually matters, that teaches you something real. Hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps more people find videos like this, and it takes you literally 1 second. And subscribe and ring the bell, because next week we're covering something even bigger. A story most history channels are too scared to tell. You don't want to miss it. But before you go, I want your opinion. Down in the comments, was it Spain that broke Napoleon? Or Russia? Make your case. I read every single comment. Thanks for watching. History is not the past, it's a warning. See you in the next one.